Hello and welcome. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception, and we are continuing in our journey through the Gospel of John. We're picking up tonight with John 18, verse 39. Got the thumbnail over here on this side of the screen. So many fascinating things with this, and I think that you could go through the Passion account, as with so much of the Scriptures. It applies to all of the Word of God because it is infinite in what it conveys to us, what it teaches us. But I think you could go through the Passion account again and again and again, and every time come across things, realizations that you had not seen before, that you had not noticed before, because it is the greatest drama that has ever played out. So we're going to go from here in 1839 down to John 19:6, and we're just going to read it all, and then we will talk about it. And I should go back one verse. Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no fault in him at all. But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the King of the Jews?" They then all cried again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. So then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe. Then they said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him with their hands. Pilate then went out again and said to them, "Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him." Then Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." Therefore, when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to our law he ought to die because he made himself out to be the Son of God." Then when Pilate therefore heard that saying, he was more afraid, and went again into the praetorium and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have the power to crucify you and the power to release you?" Jesus answered, "You could have no power at all against me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has greater sin." From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, "If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar." When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." But they cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall we crucify your king?" And the chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Then he delivered him to be crucified. Then they took Jesus and led him away. I had misspoken before. It wasn't through verse 6. It was through verse 16, obviously. So many fascinating things here at play in this account. And I find Pilate just fascinating in the different things that he does and how he does it. At the very beginning here, we have a grand example of where you have to ignore this stuff, all of this, because it makes you think there's a separation between this, "I find no fault in him at all." This is the same discussion, but you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the King of the Jews? In one of the other accounts, he says, because he knew that it was because of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. Here's a leadership 101 lesson, okay? You can't make everyone happy. Part of where Pilate goes wrong is Pilate is trying to make everyone happy. He's trying to keep the Jews happy and still manage to do the right thing. Because you can tell, it is clear again and again and again. Pilate thinks this is nonsense and Jesus should be set free. But he's going to get backed into the corner because he doesn't just stand up and do the right thing and take the shots that are going to come with that and deal with the Jewish mob being unhappy. But he's concerned the city is full of people. This is the Passover. All Jewish males were supposed to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year, but the big one that they wouldn't miss was the Passover. The city was filled to the brim, no space available, and he didn't want a riot. And this was quickly going to get out of hand. So he talks about the custom they have. Here's one of his ways he's looking for an out. He's thinking, yeah, the chief priests want Jesus killed, but the crowd here, this guy was pretty popular. They probably don't want him killed. They'll want this Barabbas guy freed. But what do they cry out? Not this man, but Barabbas. And I love this picture of Barabbas over here, the way he is portrayed. You know, he's just a common thug. They wanted Barabbas. Now then, Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. Let's talk about that. There were 3 kinds of scourging that the Romans used, and they varied in intensity. And from the word in the Greek, you can't tell which one it is because there are different words in Latin for this. But based on how things were done, this first scourging that Jesus received was the lesser of the 3. That's just what is likely. Pilate wanted to give him a beating, make it look good enough for the Jews. He's been punished. I told him to behave. Let's let this guy go. And it's not that scourging was nothing. I mean, he was beaten. It is not the same as the scourging that happened when someone was crucified. It wasn't enough to crucify somebody. They also would scourge them with the thing called the cat o' nine tails. It was basically a bunch of things, 9 different strands with things at the end, hooks, glass, and the like, that would dig into the flesh and tear it up. This wasn't that scourging. It was just, you were bad, we're going to give you a beating and send you home and tell you, don't come back here because you'll be in real trouble. That was this scourging. And the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns. They're mocking him. And remember the antipathy between the Jewish troops, the troops of occupation there. They didn't like the Jews. They just didn't. And the other thing that we see here, these were battle-hardened guys. Okay, they were professional soldiers. This is what they did. And justice then and justice now, and I'm even talking about justice 50 years ago, not the lack of justice that exists in our society today. We don't have a justice system. Very often it seems we have an injustice system. It was hard. It was brutal. And that's a big part of what these guys did. They killed people for a living, okay? Roman style, without remorse, without any compassion or compunction, trying to find the easy way out. If you rebelled, they crushed you. That's who these guys were. They didn't like the Jews, and now they've got this guy, this yokel, who's supposed to be a king of the Jews. They're going to have some fun with him. So they make this crown of thorns, which is a brutal thing to have shoved down on your head, and they put a purple robe on him, the color of royalty, and they mocked him, "Hail, King of the Jews," and they struck him with their hands. Nobody was going to come after them later for this unkindness, for this abuse of someone. It simply wasn't going to happen. And remember, in their system of justice, he had no rights. You weren't a Roman. Whatever Pilate did for you was pure grace. He didn't have to do anything for you. They're basically, by our standards, there were no rules. Whatever Pilate said is what was going to happen. He was the Roman authority. Remember, later, Paul pulls out his Roman citizenship card at one point when he's getting ready to be beaten and everybody withdraws. You didn't beat an uncondemned Roman. There were strict rules and regulations. Paul was able to appeal to Caesar, and he does. Okay, Jesus had none of those rights in this justice system. He wasn't a Roman. So after this has gone on, Pilate brings him out again. And I struggled with the title of this. With, I use not this man, but Barabbas. There's also behold the man. There's so many things to talk about with each of these things. But Pilate went out to them again and said to them, behold, I am bringing him out to you that you may know that I find no fault in him. That should have been the end of it. If he had backbone, if he wasn't trying to keep them happy rather than doing the right thing, it would have ended right there. Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, behold the man. You can take that and run in all kinds of directions with it. He's kind of mocking them. You're afraid of this guy? Who is he? Look at him. He has no power. He has no troops. And you guys are all in a twist about this. Behold the man. That's one level. There's something else here for us. God is here and was throughout Jesus' life and still is today. God was a man. He subjected himself to this. He knowingly subjected himself to this. He knew what was coming, and he humbled himself all the way to the cross. Humbling is making yourself low. Humbling is not making use of the right, the power, and authority that is yours. That is power that he used in the garden when they came to arrest him, and he knocked them down. So many things that can be talked about here. Therefore, when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, crucify him, crucify him. But those who were supposed to be about God's justice crying out for the crucifixion of God himself. Pilate said to them, you take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. This is an absurd statement. Not that he finds no fault in him. It tells you the conflict and the turmoil in his mind that Pilate was feeling. He knew they couldn't crucify him. The Jews weren't allowed to crucify anyone. The Jews weren't allowed to execute anyone. They're going to throw that back at him. They could enforce their laws within reason. Execution, that was up to the Romans. They were the real bosses. But Pilate is so, for lack of a better term, flustered. He says, you take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. Now that last part, how many times has he said that? I find no fault in him. There's nothing that this guy has done that is worthy of really even punishment, certainly not death. The Jews answered him, we have a law, and according to our law, he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God. And they're quoting from Leviticus 24:16, whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him, the sojourner as well as the native. When he blasphemes the name, Hashem, the name, shall be put to death. The name was God. Hashem was God, is how God presents it. But interestingly, if we go look at John 10:33, there in that instance, the Jews answered him, it is not good work that we are going to stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God. That was one of these exchanges that they had. And then looking back at John 5:18, this is why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. This is the thing that they have been after him for all the while, all the way through. He made himself out to be God. Now that's going to get Pilate's attention. And this goes back to what I've pointed out before. Pilate was fascinated with Jesus, with his calm. Yeah, he threw off the line, what is truth? When Jesus said, everyone on the side of truth follows me, hears me. But Pilate could see that there was something special in this man. And it's part of why he had the hesitancy to do anything about it. So when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. Pilate, the governor, the Roman governor, was afraid. He entered his headquarters again and said to Jesus, where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. This was the hour of darkness. This was going to go down no matter what? And that's, just truth on a higher level. It's what was happening and the way things were. This was going to go down. It didn't matter what Jesus said. He was going to get crucified. So Pilate said to him, and this again is one of these things that just fascinates me. So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the authority to release you and the authority to crucify you?" Pilate doesn't understand. He's in the presence of Jesus, and he can tell there's something special here, but he's still treating him as an underling. He's still treating him as though, because he doesn't know who he is. He's talking about his authority, and he's not saying it in a braggadocious way. He's almost pleading with Jesus, just talk to me. I can get you out of this. Don't you understand that? And you're not trying to help me. Speak up and say something. It's up to me. It's under my authority to release you and my authority to crucify you. Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." The way this is said here, the way this is stated, is very emphatic in the Greek. And I'm not going to go into it because it's too complex, just to explain quickly. But it's a long-winded way of saying it, and it is that way for the sake of being emphatic. You absolutely would have no power over me at all in any way if it hadn't been given to you from above. And the presupposition is, but it has been given to you from above. But you think you have power that is your own, that isn't. You don't get it. You don't understand it, is what Jesus is saying. But it doesn't matter what he was going to say. It wasn't going to change things. He goes on, "Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." Now, here's the question, and it's up for consideration. Who is the one who delivered me over to them? Terrible grammar. Who is the one who delivered Jesus over to them? Was it Pilate? Well, Pilate delivered him over to the Sanhedrin, to the chief priests. The chief priests are the one, the chief priest was the one who handed him over to Pilate on behalf of the Jewish people. And I think that's who the one who has the greater sin is talking about, the Jewish high priest who represented all the people before God. That was his divinely assigned task. So Pilate gets nowhere with Jesus, but then what is he still trying to do? From then on, Pilate sought to release him. Well, what had he been doing before? He's been trying to release him, but he hasn't gotten anywhere. But it's just making it clear. John, the writer here, is making it clear. Pilate wants to let him go. He's trying to find any way possible to let him go. But the Jews cried out, and here it is, the card that's going to seal it. "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So here we have the chief priests, the Sanhedrin, the Jewish people who abhor Roman rule. They can't stand it. They can't stand it. In 70 AD, they're all going to revolt against it to their deaths. Okay? They can't stand Rome. They can't stand Caesar. They can't stand the authority that holds them in check. But they're going to basically appeal to Caesar, right? Remember when they tried to trick Jesus about, should we pay the tax or not? Should we pay tax to Caesar? And because they were trying to get him in trouble with the Roman authorities. And what did Jesus say? He said, "Give me a coin." They gave him a coin. He looked at it and said, whose picture, whose inscription is this? They said, "Caesar. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." They tried to trick him up with the Roman authorities there, and this is the thing that's going to seal his fate with Pilate. "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So that's it. That was because Pilate waffled, because he was trying to take the easy way out and not offend anyone, he now has been backed into a corner where he has no choice but to go along with what they say. He could have sent them away a long time ago, but he didn't. So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at the place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." And they cried out, away with him, crucify him." So he's out. He is out on the seat where judgment would be pronounced. It's kind of comparable to a judge being there and having his gavel, but he always sits there. It's more comparable, not when the Pope speaks, and he speaks ex cathedra, from the chair, then it's official doctrine. Most people don't realize that. The Pope can say whatever he wants, and he does. It's only official church doctrine if he sits down in the chair in St. Peter's Basilica and says it. Then it's official. Okay, so that's the parallel here. Interestingly, the Roman pontiff, the Roman Pope, here, the Roman authority. Notice how Rome just doesn't go away. Did a video in the book of Revelation, the Rome that doesn't die. It hasn't gone away. Go look at the architecture of all the leading buildings of the world, all the centers of power. Look at the Vatican, look in London, look all over the United States. It's all Roman architecture. It hasn't gone away. But he sits down in the seat of judgment, and once he proclaims something from there, it's done. It's about the 6th hour. What is the 6th hour? That's noon. And remember, Jesus hasn't slept. This has been going on nonstop. 6th hour is noon. Day starts at 6 in the morning, runs through 12th hour being 6 in the evening. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." He keeps throwing it at them. We read this and we make the mistake of not thinking about it because we've heard it how many times? How many times have you heard this text? If you've been a believer for a large portion of your life or all your life, you've heard it so many times, but it's a big thing. He keeps saying this, "Behold your king." He's throwing it back in their faces, and understand this. He can't stand them. He can't stand them. He loathes them, and they've backed him into a corner. So he's just going to poke them some more. Here, this beaten guy wearing a crown of thorns, he's your king. And what is he going to have hung above? And this part isn't in the Gospel of John, I don't think, blanking out, but it's in one of the Gospels. The sign written above his head in 4 different languages, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, and that ticked him off. And he said, "What I have written, I've written." He's basically, by then, he's done with them. He's saying, "Go away." And what do they say when he says, "Behold your king"? They cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he delivered him over to them to be crucified. 2 interesting things there. We have no king but Caesar. It is almost as though an alignment, what do I want to say? Drawing a blank. They align themselves together here. We have no king but Caesar. The opposition to Jesus, that is Rome, that kind of continues on. I think there could be something there to delve into. But they said, "We have no king but Caesar." This from the Jews who say that God is their king and the only king. But in the moment of passion, they didn't care. They just wanted what they wanted, and that was the destruction of the one that Yahweh himself had sent to them as their Savior. We have no king but Caesar. And then it says this, so he delivered him over to them to be crucified. You find a problem with that statement. Who's going to crucify him? The Romans are. Now, these are John's words, inspired by the Holy Spirit. These are John's words. But he delivered him over to them to be crucified. It's almost as though the them is the Jews. He's lumping them all together in guilt. They're the ones who wanted it. He may be the one carrying it out, But John saying it's the Jews who are every bit as responsible as Pilate, and really more so, because the argument can be made, and it's very obvious, doesn't even have to be an argument. You can go through and see, and we have pointed out Pilate tried to release him again and again and again, and they resisted again and again and again. In the other Gospels, and remember, John came after the other Gospels, so he doesn't cover all the details that the other Gospels do because he expects that his readers know it. In the other Gospels, it talks about the leaders of the Jews stirring up the mob against him. John doesn't mention that here because he assumes that it's a known in the believing community. Next time, we'll continue on and we will go to the very horrible, fascinating, profound, terrible thing that, and it can be said as well, wonderful thing. We got to think on that one for a while, of the crucifixion. And we'll deal with that all in one video. Appreciate you watching. I encourage you, go out when you're watching our videos, support this ministry, support what we do. All you have to do is go right down here. There's the video playing on BitChute. Click right there and you can support us. It's on our homepage up at the top right on our BitChute channel as well. You can also right here, if you're watching on YouTube, you can come here and click on the support our ministry button, and that will take you right to our PayPal page where you can make a contribution to support this work. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception. God bless and have a great day.